Now, okay, welcome to this webinar, which is about sibling fighting. Now, you probably already know that I'm not going to talk about how to get your children to stop fighting. I'm not going to offer you ways to control your children or bring an immediate stop to the fighting. That's not what I'm on about, although they may stop fighting as a result of other things that I'm going to talk about, but that's not the objective. Getting your kids to stop fighting is not my objective here. What I do want to help you with is your reactions to your children fighting. What happens within you when your children start fighting, and how does what is happening within you contribute to the situation that's happening in your family. So I'm just going to go through a series of steps to describe what actually happens when your children start fighting. So just imagine a situation in which you have children fighting in your home. And now that could look very different in different families, in different circumstances, different ages, all that sort of stuff. It can look very different. So the first thing I would look for is there any immediate physical danger, like of serious injury? So there might be a fight, but is there an immediate danger, like right now, that somebody is going to get seriously hurt? So in that situation, I would intervene physically and separate the children, like physically put my body in the situation so that I can protect whoever it is who might be in immediate physical danger. So I don't want to see anybody getting seriously injured. So I'm quite willing to step in and actually use my body or my words to try and prevent that, you know, to assertively say, stop right now. You're about to, you know, if one child is about to hit another child over the head with a hammer or a glass bottle, or, you know, there's actually something really dangerous happening, then I will yell. I will do what is necessary to in that moment to protect the physical safety of my child. So that could be happening, or they might just be having a screaming match, or hitting each other, or punching each other, or rolling around on the floor, or, you know, scratching or something like that, which might be very loud. It might sound offensive. There might be minor injuries like scratches and bruises and things like that, but I would put that in a different category to an immediate risk of serious, you know, physical injury. So let's assume for the moment that nobody's about to be killed or seriously injured, or, you know, have to be taken off to hospital. You've got a fight in your house. So what happens next is usually some sort of judgment of that situation. So the mind will come in and there will be a judgment, something along the lines of, you know, they shouldn't be fighting, or this shouldn't be happening, or fighting is wrong, it's bad and I want it to stop. Or it might be a judgment of one particular child and not the other. You might judge one child as he shouldn't be picking a fight with his sibling. So the thing to notice is what you are actually thinking about the situation. What judgment are you putting on this situation or on your children? So the next thing that happens is that there's an emotional reaction that follows that thought, that follows the judgment. So we have the situation, then we have the judgment, what we're thinking about it, and then we have an emotional response to that thought. So that could be frustration, it could be anger, it could be fear, you could be experiencing a very scary story actually going in your head about projecting into the future what might happen if this continues. I know I had this scary story many times. So the story goes something like, if they keep fighting like this, either somebody will get seriously injured, or they'll just become more and more violent, and it'll get worse and worse, and I'll just end up with these violent brutes for children instead of the nice, calm people that I wanted to raise. So there's like this scary future story running. It's like a movie playing in my head. And there's an emotional reaction to that. So there might be fear associated with that future story, like really, really not wanting that scenario to happen. So we've got a judgment, an emotional reaction. Quite often we've got this this imagined future story running in our head, and then there's some action that arises out of all of that. So what usually happens when that cascade of things happens is that we join the fight. So we're fighting against the fighting, or we're fighting to stop the fighting. So we might yell or threaten, or we might withdraw our acceptance and our affection. We might judge our children verbally. So we might say something like, you know, that's bad or wrong, or if we don't use that sort of language, we might judge them, you know, in terms of putting some sort of fault or blame on one or the other of them. You know, you were at fault, you shouldn't have done that. This is, you know, not appropriate behaviour, etc., etc. So our action might be quite heated if it's angry and we're joining the fight to actually try and stop it, or it might be more sort of measured and judgmental, or it could be some other way of trying to control our children to try and get them to stop that behaviour. So it might be some sort of punishment or withdrawal of approval, or some sort of manipulation or threat, some means of trying to control them to get them to stop. And the other sort of thing that might happen in that situation is a whole lot of self-judgment might get triggered. So stories about how we will be judged as a bad parent if people see my children are fighting like this. You know, a good parent should be able to control their child. A good parent is responsible for the children's well-being, and if they're fighting, you know, things aren't going right. So we judge ourselves, we worry about what other people will think of us, and when that happens, what's essentially happening is we're fighting internally. So there's a fight going on out there, and now we're fighting ourselves internally. We're attacking ourselves because of what's happening. So what goes from a situation of let's say 2 or 3 siblings actually having a conflict over there, now becomes a situation where the parent has joined in the conflict and is fighting the kids. So there's now 3 people fighting, or 4, or however many, and there's this internal fighting going on because we're actually attacking ourselves because we think this shouldn't be happening. So this is a situation where there's now a whole lot more conflict. There's a whole lot more difficult feelings being generated because of this pattern of judgment and reaction and taking action on the basis of that. So what are the effects of this pattern? Well, there might be a short-term control. You might actually be able to get your child or your children to stop fighting in the short term. And that would normally be a fear-based response. So if they're actually really scared of your reaction, your anger or your disapproval, then they might stop. But it's more than likely to be a short-term fix in my experience. And in any event, it's not something that, it's not a path that I find fits with my highest values. I don't want my children behaving out of fear of me and my anger or disapproval. It's not how I want to live. And I actually think that when and obviously I have judged and attacked and all that sort of stuff, because that's the pattern that I grew up with. It's the pattern that's generally accepted in our society. So it's likely to happen in your family as it has in mine. But when I actually join the fight, when I judge and attack or withdraw emotionally or punish or whatever happens, then essentially I'm setting my children up for more of the same. Like in joining the fight, I'm perpetuating that pattern of fighting and attacking. So it's just not modeling a different way. It's basically fighting with fighting. Now, obviously, people have tried this for thousands of years, and to my mind, it hasn't worked. So I'm aiming for a different sort of approach, a different solution. So what to do if you don't want to go down that path of attacking, fighting, withdrawing, trying to get your kids to stop, controlling them, all that sort of stuff? What do you do? So firstly, I've said if there isn't a immediate physical danger, you know, if there's a real safety issue, I will physically intervene. And I have two sons, as you know, and they did fight every day for many, many years. And they were very, very physical about it. So there were times when I actually did have to physically intervene, particularly when my youngest was fairly small. He was probably, you know, more likely to get injured than his older brother. So I would like physically put myself in between them and you know, just to provide a sort of buffer. But over the years, I found that I really came to question my perception of the danger, my perception of the danger of serious injury, because as I observed my children over a period of time, and as I questioned these judgments that it's wrong or bad or it shouldn't be happening, what I actually came to observe was that they were fighting, they were physical, they were certainly, you know, hitting and scratching and, you know, making a lot of noise. But what I observed was they didn't actually injure each other. It was like a very fierce wrestling match. And neither of them, even though they did this every day for years and years, neither of them got hurt, ever. Nothing more than a little scratch or a bruise that was, you know, easy to recover from. So through observation, I noticed that my perception of the physical danger wasn't matching reality. You know, the reality was they were fighting, but they weren't actually hurting each other. They weren't really going to try to hurt each other. It was sort of quite carefully calibrated in a way, so they didn't actually ever hurt each other. So you might like to actually observe your children fighting and see what's actually happening, and try and distinguish between what's a real immediate physical danger and what's an imagined story about a danger that could be happening in the future or might happen. So sometimes we have, sometimes siblings fighting can actually trigger some deep traumas within us, and it might be triggering some images, some memories of physical pain and trauma for ourselves that aren't related to what's actually happening with our children. So if that is happening, then that's an issue that you might want to investigate and get help with. But it is something to be aware of, and to question, what is your perception of the degree of danger, of harm, when your children are fighting? So that's the first thing I would do, is to actually observe and question the degree of danger. Secondly, I would interrupt the pattern of my reaction. So when I say the pattern, it's this pattern of judgment, and then the emotional response to that, and then the action arising out of my judgment. So this is the joining the fight pattern. And the way I interrupt that pattern of reaction is to question my judgments and thoughts about the situation. And I do that using the work, the Byron Katie questions. And so I would do it on a thought like, they shouldn't be fighting like that. And, it's wrong for them to be fighting like that. And I would ask myself the questions, is it true that they shouldn't be fighting? Can I absolutely know that it's true that they shouldn't be fighting? And when I asked myself that question, I had to answer, well, no, I don't know it's absolutely true that they shouldn't be fighting. They are fighting every day, and they seem to be handling it okay. How do I react? This is the third question. How do I react when I believe that thought, they shouldn't be fighting? And that's when it goes into this cascade of me reacting and joining the fight. So when I believe the thought, they shouldn't be fighting, when I believe that judgment, then I end up joining the fight. I end up yelling, or, having this angry, frustrated, fearful reaction. So who would I be without that judgment? Who would I be without that story that they shouldn't be fighting? Well, I would be somebody who is there and present and available to help, available to comfort, available to guide, available to respectfully allow my children to have their own relationship. I would be much freer because I wouldn't be joining the fight. I could actually be there as a genuine support, and as somebody who was minding my own business. So actually going through this process and questioning my thinking, once the judgment is out of the way, I can actually respond to my children with much more compassion and understanding, because I can see them more clearly. I can see that they're fighting either because they're actually suffering, that they're genuinely distressed, and also because they're just believing their thoughts. They're interacting with each other in this particular way. I can understand it. I can actually have compassion, and I can be there to support them if they need help, but I'm not assuming that they need help, because I'm not assuming that there's a problem. Okay, so I use these questions, the work, to question my judgments, I am also open to expressing my feelings about the situation. So even if I'm not judging this as wrong or bad, or that they shouldn't be doing it, it's often still not my preference, that they're doing it. I don't like to listen to a whole lot of fighting and carrying on. I don't like to see people, getting hit and what have you. But the key is to express my feelings non-violently. So without joining the fight, without adding judgment and blame, I can still tell my children how I feel. So I might say something like this. I might say, when I see you hitting your brother like that, I feel scared. I feel scared that he'll get hurt. Can you please come and get me if you're feeling upset, and I can help you, figure this out. So you can actually be quite assertive in how you express your feelings. You can actually, many times I've been visibly upset and crying, because the violence has escalated, or the fight has escalated, and I'm like, I really feel upset, I feel really upset and frustrated, or sad, that you're fighting like this. Can you please stop? Can you please ask for help? Can you speak to each other instead of hitting each other? So this is actually expressing how I feel and making a request that they do something differently, and giving them some ideas of how they might do things differently. And that can be done very assertively, but the difference is it's not a judgment and there's no blame involved. It's just me expressing my feelings. I've got a problem with this and I'd like some help. I'd like you not to fight like this. So I'm open to expressing my feelings about the situation. I often found, though, that I could express my feelings about the situation and my children would just continue to do what they were doing, because they were very absorbed in their own relationship and in the dynamics between them. So basically, me getting upset about the noise or them fighting was an intrusion into their relationship. So what they really wanted from me often was for me to mind my own business and let them get on with it, because they wanted to have this relationship. They wanted to test each other's limits and to work through the stuff that was going on in their relationship. And more often than not, they would have a big fight. They would have a bit of a cry. They would complain to me about the other person. And then within minutes, they would be back playing together really happily. So if I didn't intervene and put a judgment on the situation, if I didn't intervene and start talking about fault or blame or any of that, what they experienced was a clean conflict. They had a fight and then it passed, and then they got back to playing, and there was no hard feelings, no lingering sort of story about it at all. It was just like, something had just blown up and now it had passed, and they just got on, with play and with really enjoying each other's company. And what I experienced over time was that they had these fights, and the nature of their fighting changed over time, and things got resolved between them, and eventually they just stopped fighting. They stopped fighting completely. They haven't fought for years and years and years. So it was actually just part of their development, part of their relationship, and it passed. And without any blame or judgment or feelings about, labels about wrongness or, that it was bad or any of that, then it just passed, and there's a clean slate for them to actually, continue to play and enjoy their relationship. So having said that, I mean, there is still room to, if you're not joining the fight, if you're not getting into this cycle of judgment and blame and attack, and you're not joining the fight, if you're actually still calm, then you're in a good place to offer comfort, to offer some guidance, to suggest some new ways that they might resolve conflicts. And there are lots of things that can be done to help lessen the degree of conflict. And you may actually have some great ideas about that yourself. You can actually change the environment sometimes. I found it was really helpful for my kids to have separate personal space, to have their own rooms, for example, or their own part of a room, in order that they, weren't physically, in each other's space. Some other things that worked really well for my kids was to give each of them one-on-one time, one-on-one playtime with me. And that really seemed to lessen, to some extent, the sibling rivalry for my attention, because that was intense. They both wanted me, and they were competing for that attention a lot of the time. So the more I could actually give them one-on-one focused attention with the other child out of the room, the more their cup was filled, and the less that conflict, got out of hand. So one-on-one playtime was really important. And also just, giving them more autonomy, so they're not feeling controlled. Because, of course, the more children feel judged and controlled, the more they're likely to take it out on their siblings. So the more autonomy and respect you can give them, then over time, the more likely they are to give that to each other. But over time, it can take time for that to develop. And there may be lots of other things you can do to support a particular child or both children, to do with diet. There's all sorts of things that you can do to support your children to work through these conflicts. You can guide them about how to speak to each other. But all those things are really, to me, secondary to the main focus, which is always on what's going on inside myself. How am I reacting to this situation? What am I thinking about it? How are my actions adding to the conflict, or are they actually modelling a way forward without conflict, without this pattern of judgment and blame? So it is a confronting issue. It did bring up a whole lot of stories for me, a whole lot of judgments, a whole lot of, baggage from my childhood. And it was a great opportunity to really have a good look at that, and to unpack it, and to question my thinking, and to question my beliefs about physical violence, and about fighting, and about conflict in general, and to question my judgments about it. And I feel very differently about those things than I used to. And as I said, the conflict has changed over time, and it's changed to the extent that my sons just don't fight anymore. So it's been a very interesting journey, and I look forward to hearing your perspectives and to answering your questions, which I will start to do now. So I'm going to stop the recording. And for those of you who are listening to this as a replay, I'm happy to answer questions that you can, send me a personal message or post your questions in one of the groups. If you'd like to know more about how you can support your children, and how you can go inwards to investigate your patterns and beliefs and reactions to your children. I do have my Joyful Parenting course starting again at the end of July, and there are details about that on my website, www.freyadawson.com.au. So the Joyful Parenting course is coming up at the end of July, and I also have a special at the moment on my one-on-one coaching. So if you're interested in getting more support, more information in relation to your own parenting journey, then please have a look at the website and please get in touch with me. So thank you very much for listening, and I will now turn it over to questions.